Get in my car now. Wealthy CEO tells black single mother of 3. His stunning act shocks all. The boxes hit the sidewalk with a sound that made Denise Williams flinch. Each thud felt like another piece of her dignity crumbling away. She stood on the cracked pavement of Maple Street, watching 2 burly men in stained coveralls toss her life out of apartment 3B like yesterday's garbage. Mama, where are we gonna sleep tonight? 8-year-old Keisha tugged at Denise's worn jeans, her big brown eyes wide with confusion. The little girl clutched a stuffed rabbit that had seen better days, its fur matted from countless nights of comfort. We'll figure it out, baby, Denise whispered, though her voice cracked. She pulled Keisha closer, feeling the weight of failure pressing down on her chest. 12-year-old Marcus stood beside them, his jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded her too much of his father, the man who'd promised forever and delivered 3 years before vanishing like smoke. 6-year-old Jamal clung to her other side, his small hand gripping her shirt so tightly his knuckles had gone white. Are we homeless now, Mama? The question hit harder than any punch. Denise closed her eyes for a moment, fighting back tears. She'd worked double shifts at the diner for months, her feet screaming in those cheap shoes, just to keep a roof over their heads. But it wasn't enough. It was never enough. Ma'am, you need to move along, one of the movers called out, not bothering to look at her face. He was already heading back inside for another load. We got a schedule to keep. Those are my things, Denise said, her voice stronger than she felt. At least let me pack them properly. The man shrugged. Should have thought about that before you stopped paying rent. Not our problem now. A small crowd had gathered, neighbors peering from behind curtains, kids on bikes stopping to stare. Mrs. Henderson from next door stood on her porch, shaking her head with a mixture of pity and relief that it wasn't her family on the street. This ain't right, Marcus muttered, his 12-year-old voice carrying a bitterness that broke Denise's heart. They treating us like we ain't even people. Marcus, Denise warned softly. The last thing they needed was for him to mouth off and make things worse. But she felt the same rage burning in her chest. 3 months ago, their rent had mysteriously jumped from $800 to $1,400. No explanation, just a notice slipped under the door. When she tried to fight it, the landlord's office had given her the runaround, forms to fill out, fees to pay, appointments that led nowhere. Now here she was, watching everything she'd worked for get thrown onto the street like trash. The rumble of an expensive engine cut through her thoughts. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb, its paint job so perfect it reflected the afternoon sun like a mirror. The car looked completely out of place on Maple Street, where most vehicles had more rust than paint. Denise instinctively pulled her children closer. Rich people didn't come to this neighborhood unless they were slumming or looking to buy cheap property. Either way, it usually meant trouble for folks like her. The driver's door opened, and a tall black man stepped out. He wore a perfectly tailored navy suit that probably cost more than Denise made in 3 months. His shoes were polished leather, not the scuffed sneakers most men around here wore. But it was his face that caught her attention, sharp cheekbones, intense dark eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He looked familiar somehow, though Denise was certain she'd never met anyone who moved in circles where $1,000 suits were everyday wear. The man's gaze swept over the scene, the boxes scattered on the sidewalk, the movers tossing out furniture, and finally landing on Denise and her children. His expression hardened in a way that made something cold settle in Denise's stomach. He walked toward them with purpose, his stride confident and controlled. The movers had stopped to stare too. Even they seemed to sense that whoever this was, he wasn't someone to mess with. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying authority that made everyone in earshot pay attention. He was looking directly at Denise now, and she felt exposed under that intense stare. "Are these your belongings?" Denise lifted her chin, forcing herself to meet his eyes despite the shame burning in her cheeks. "Yes, they are. And before you say anything, we're not looking for charity." Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe even approval. "I'm not here to offer charity." He glanced at the movers, then back at her. "My name is Jonathan Pierce." I own Pierce Development Corporation. Denise's stomach dropped. She'd heard that name before. Pierce Development was one of those big companies that bought up old neighborhoods and turned them into fancy condos that regular people couldn't afford. If he was here, it probably meant more bad news. Look, if you're here to buy the building or whatever, we'll be gone as soon as. Get in my car now. The words were spoken quietly, but they cut through the air like a blade. Every conversation on the street stopped. Even the movers froze mid-step. Denise stared at him, certain she'd misheard. What did you just say? You heard me. Get your children and get in my car. Now. The way he said it wasn't a request. It was an order, delivered with the kind of authority that made people jump. But Denise Williams had been pushed around enough for one day. I don't know who you think you are. She started, her voice rising. But you can't just roll up here in your fancy car and... I think I'm someone who knows exactly what's happening here. Jonathan interrupted, his voice still calm but carrying an edge that made Marcus step protectively in front of his siblings. And I think you're someone who's about to spend the night on the street with 3 kids unless you stop being stubborn and listen to me. Denise felt her cheeks burn with anger and humiliation. The whole neighborhood was watching now, waiting to see what she'd do. Part of her wanted to tell this arrogant rich man exactly where he could shove his offer. But Keisha's small hand in hers and Jamal's quiet sniffling reminded her that her pride was a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Why? She asked finally. Why would you want to help us? You don't even know us. Jonathan's expression shifted, something almost vulnerable flickering in those intense eyes before the mask slipped back into place. Because, he said quietly, this building belongs to one of my properties. And I don't allow families to be thrown out like garbage on my watch. The admission hit the crowd like a bomb. Murmurs rippled through the gathered neighbors. The movers looked uncertain for the first time since they'd arrived. But Denise felt a different kind of shock. If he owned the building, then he was ultimately responsible for what had happened to her family. The rage that had been simmering all day finally boiled over. So this is your fault, she whispered, her voice shaking. You're the reason my babies are homeless. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Ma'am, I suggest you get in the car before you say something we'll both regret. We have a lot to discuss, and this street isn't the place to do it. The standoff stretched between them, electric with tension. In the background, one of the movers cleared his throat. Boss? He called out to no one in particular. Are we supposed to keep loading or? Jonathan never took his eyes off Denise. You're going to trust me, or you're going to spend tonight in a homeless shelter. Your choice. But choose fast, I don't have all day. Denise looked at her children, then at the boxes scattered on the ground, then at the man whose mere presence had changed everything in the space of 5 minutes. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, that men like him didn't help people like her without wanting something in return. But as she watched Jamal wipe his nose on his sleeve and felt Keisha shiver against the October wind, she realized she was out of options. Fine, she said finally, hating herself for the defeat in her voice. But if you're planning to hurt my children... The only thing I'm planning to hurt, Jonathan said as he opened the rear door of the Mercedes, is whoever's responsible for putting you on this street in the first place. As Denise ushered her confused children toward the expensive car, she couldn't shake the feeling that everything in their lives was about to change. She just wasn't sure if it would be for better or worse. The leather seats of the Mercedes were butter-soft against Denise's back, but she couldn't relax. Every muscle in her body stayed coiled tight as Jonathan pulled away from the curb, leaving their scattered belongings and her former life behind on the sidewalk. Mama, this car smells like money, Jamal whispered, pressing his face against the window. His breath fogged the glass as they drove past the corner store where Denise bought their groceries with food stamps, past the bus stop where she waited every morning at 5 a.m. to get to her first job. Don't touch anything, she warned her children, though her voice came out sharper than intended. Marcus sat stiffly beside her, his eyes never leaving Jonathan's reflection in the rearview mirror. At 12, he was old enough to understand that accepting help from strangers, especially rich strangers, usually came with a price. "Where are you taking us?" Denise finally asked when Jonathan turned onto Main Street, heading away from the projects and toward the part of town where she'd only been to clean office buildings at night. "Somewhere safe," Jonathan replied without turning around. His hands gripped the steering wheel with practiced ease, but Denise caught the tension in his shoulders. "Somewhere we can talk without an audience." "I don't want to talk. I want to know why you really stopped." Denise leaned forward, ignoring the expensive cologne that seemed to fill the car. "Men like you don't just drive around rescuing people like me. So what's the catch? What do you want?" Jonathan's eyes found hers in the mirror, and for a split second, she saw something raw there, something that didn't match the perfect suit or the corporate authority. "Men like me?" he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "And what kind of man do you think I am, Mrs. Williams?" The fact that he knew her name sent a chill down her spine. "How do you?" "I know your name because I know your building. I know every family that lives there, and I know every family that's been forced out in the past 6 months. His voice carried an edge now, controlled fury barely kept in check. "What I don't know is why it's happening without my knowledge or consent." Keisha stirred beside her mother, clutching her stuffed rabbit tighter. "Mama, is he gonna hurt us?" "No, baby," Denise said automatically, though she wasn't sure she believed it herself. She studied Jonathan's profile as he navigated through traffic with the confidence of someone who never had to worry about car payments or insurance premiums. "You said this building belongs to one of your properties. If that's true, then you know exactly why families are getting kicked out." "Actually, I don't." Jonathan's jaw tightened as he pulled into the parking garage of a gleaming office tower. "Pierce Development owns the management company that oversees your building. But I don't personally handle every rental property in our portfolio." "How convenient," Denise muttered. "Rich man owns the building but doesn't know families are getting destroyed. Typical." The car jerked to a stop, and Jonathan turned around to face her fully. His eyes blazed with something that made her breath catch. "Mrs. Williams, I'm going to say this once, and I need you to hear me. I grew up 6 blocks from where I found you today. I know what it feels like to watch your belongings get thrown on the street. I know what it's like to sleep in your car because the shelter's full. And I know what it's like to have people look at you like you're less than human because you can't pay your bills." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Jamal stopped fidgeting, sensing the weight of the moment. Denise stared at him, searching his face for signs of deception. But the pain in his voice had sounded real, too real to be an act. "You're lying," she whispered, though her conviction wavered. "People like you don't come from places like that." "People like me?" Jonathan smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You mean successful? Rich? Because let me tell you something, success doesn't erase where you came from. Money doesn't make you forget the sound of eviction notices sliding under your door." Marcus spoke up for the first time since getting in the car. "If you really grew up like us, then why didn't you stop this from happening?" Jonathan's expression softened as he looked at the boy. "Because someone's been lying to me about what's happening in my properties. Someone's been taking advantage of families like yours while I've been busy building an empire." He paused, his voice growing deadly quiet. "But that ends today. This isn't charity," he continued, turning back to Denise. "This is personal. Someone used my company to hurt people who remind me of my own family. Someone made me complicit in the exact kind of cruelty I swore I'd never allow." Denise felt something shift in her chest, not trust, exactly, but a crack in the wall she'd built around herself. "Even if that's true, what makes you think I want your help? Maybe I'd rather figure this out on my own." "Because figuring it out on your own means your kids sleep on the street tonight," Jonathan said bluntly. "And because whoever's behind this is counting on you being too proud to fight back." "I'm not too proud," Denise snapped. "I'm too tired. I work 2 jobs, Mr. Pierce. I get up at 4:30 every morning to serve coffee to people who don't see me as human. I come home to help with homework and cook dinner with whatever's left in the pantry. I don't have time to fight corporate lawyers and property managers who make more in a month than I see all year. Then let me fight them for you. The offer hung between them like a challenge. Denise felt her children watching her, waiting to see if she'd accept help from this stranger who claimed to understand their world. Why? She asked again, softer this time. Why does it matter to you? Jonathan was quiet for a long moment, his gaze drifting to the city skyline visible through the garage windows. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of old wounds. Because 25 years ago, my mother sat in a car just like this one. A social worker was driving us to our third foster home that year because the last family decided we were too much trouble. He looked directly at Denise, and she saw the scared little boy he'd once been lurking behind the CEO's mask. I promised myself that if I ever had the power to keep families together, I'd use it. And you think we need saving? Denise's voice carried challenge despite the tears threatening to spill. I think you need justice, Jonathan replied. And I think whoever's targeting families like yours is about to discover they picked the wrong building to run their scam on. As they sat in the shadow of his corporate tower, Denise felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Trust a stranger with a painful past and the expensive car, or walk away and face the night with nowhere to go. Looking at her children's faces, she realized the choice had already been made. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor felt endless. Denise watched the numbers climb while her stomach churned with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Keisha had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from the day's trauma, while Jamal pressed his face to the glass wall, marveling at the city shrinking below them. Marcus remained silent, but Denise could feel his tension. Her eldest had always been protective, carrying burdens that no 12-year-old should have to bear. Right now, he was studying Jonathan with the wariness of someone who'd learned too young that adults couldn't always be trusted. "This is your office?" Jamal breathed as the elevator doors opened to reveal a spacious reception area with floor-to-ceiling windows and artwork that probably cost more than Denise's annual income. "One of them," Jonathan said simply, leading them past an empty reception desk. "Most of my staff has gone home for the day." Denise followed him down a hallway lined with awards and photographs, Jonathan shaking hands with mayors, cutting ribbons at building openings, accepting plaques from community organizations. But it was one particular photo that made her stop in her tracks. There, in a simple black frame between all the corporate glamour, was a picture of a rundown apartment building. The same building she'd called home until this morning. "That's our building," Marcus said, coming up beside her. His voice carried accusation. "Why do you have a picture of it?" Jonathan paused, following their gaze. Something flickered across his face, pain, maybe, or regret. "Because that's where I lived when I was your age," he said quietly. "Apartment 2C. My mother, my little sister, and me crammed into 800 square feet with pipes that leaked and heat that never worked right." Denise felt the world tilt slightly. "That's impossible. That building's been low-income housing for decades." "Exactly." Jonathan's voice carried the weight of old memories. "My mother cleaned offices downtown for $12 an hour. When my father left, she had to choose between keeping us fed or keeping us warm. Usually, she chose food." He walked into his office, a massive space with a view of the entire city. But instead of sitting behind his imposing desk, he moved to a smaller seating area near the windows, gesturing for them to join him. "I remember you," he said suddenly, looking directly at Denise. "You worked at Mel's Diner on 5th Street about 8 years ago." Denise's breath caught. "How could you possibly?" "Because I used to come in there sometimes. Late at night, after board meetings that ran long. You were always kind to the homeless guys who came in just to get warm. Never made them feel like they didn't belong." Jonathan's smile was sad. "I remember thinking you understood what it was like to be invisible." The memory hit Denise like a physical blow. She did remember. A well-dressed black man who occasionally came in during her night shifts, always polite, always generous with tips. But he looked different then, younger, less polished. She never imagined he was the same person now sitting in this palace of glass and steel. "You tipped me $50 once," she whispered, the memory crystallizing. It was right before Christmas, and I'd been crying because I couldn't afford presents for the kids. You never asked why I gave you so much. You just said thank you and went back to work. Jonathan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. Most people would have questioned it, but you understood that sometimes people need to give as much as others need to receive. Marcus was looking between them with growing confusion. So you knew each other? This whole thing was planned? No, Jonathan said firmly. I had no idea Denise lived in that building until today. I have hundreds of properties across the city. I can't know every tenant personally. But you knew the building, Denise said, pieces of a puzzle she didn't fully understand starting to fit together. You kept a picture of it. Jonathan stood and walked to the window, his silhouette dark against the city lights. I kept that picture to remind me where I came from. To remind me that success means nothing if you forget the people still fighting the battles you used to fight. So why didn't you know what was happening there? Marcus's voice carried challenge that made Denise proud and worried at the same time. Jonathan turned back to them, and Denise saw something vulnerable in his expression. Because I trusted the wrong people to manage my properties. Because I got so focused on building new developments that I stopped paying attention to the communities I was supposed to be protecting. He sat back down, this time closer to them. When I bought that building 5 years ago, it was falling apart. Previous owner had let it deteriorate while jacking up rents. I promised the tenants I'd fix it up but keep it affordable. I set up a management company to handle the day-to-day operations while I focused on the renovations. But the renovations never happened, Denise said, understanding beginning to dawn. They happened in other buildings. This one kept getting pushed back, delayed by permit issues and budget constraints that I now suspect were manufactured. Jonathan's jaw tightened. While I was being told everything was running smoothly, families were being squeezed out by rent increases that should never have been approved. Keisha stirred in Denise's arms, mumbling something about wanting to go home. The innocent request cut through the conversation like a knife, reminding them all of what had been lost. There is no home anymore, baby, Denise whispered, smoothing her daughter's hair. Yes, there is, Jonathan said firmly. There's going to be. But first, we need to figure out who's been running this scam and why. Scam? Denise looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean someone's been using my company's name to systematically push out long-term tenants. Families with children, elderly people on fixed incomes, anyone who can't fight back legally. Jonathan pulled out his phone and scrolled through what looked like financial reports. In the past 6 months, occupancy in that building has dropped by 40%. Do you know what that means? Marcus, who'd been quietly absorbing everything, spoke up. It means someone wants the building empty. Exactly. Jonathan's smile held no warmth. Empty buildings can be sold as development opportunities. Premium locations for luxury condos. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. So we weren't just behind on rent, Denise said slowly. We were in the way. You were in the way of someone's profit margins. Jonathan confirmed. Someone who's been playing a long game, using my company's reputation to legitimize what amounts to theft. Jamal, who'd been unusually quiet, finally spoke up. Are we gonna get our stuff back? Jonathan knelt down to the boy's level. We're going to get your home back. Your real home, not some temporary fix. You can't promise that, Denise said quickly, though part of her desperately wanted to believe it. I can and I will. Jonathan stood, and she saw the corporate executive emerging again, the man who'd built an empire from nothing. Because whoever did this to you made one critical mistake. What's that? They used my name to do it. And nobody, destroys families in my name and gets away with it. As he spoke, Denise saw both versions of him, the scared kid from apartment 2C and the powerful CEO who could make or break careers with a phone call. For the first time since this nightmare began, she felt something she'd almost forgotten how to feel. Hope. I need to make some calls, Jonathan said, moving toward his desk. There's a conference room next door where you can rest. It has a couch where the kids can. A sharp beeping sound cut him off. Jonathan frowned, looking around his office for the source of the noise. The beeping grew more insistent, coming from somewhere near his desk. "What is that?" Denise asked, shifting Keisha to her other arm. "My laptop," Jonathan said, confusion evident in his voice. "But it shouldn't be making that sound. It was working fine this morning." Marcus, who had been quietly exploring the office, looked up from where he'd been examining a bookshelf filled with business awards. "It sounds like a system error. Maybe a hard drive failure." Jonathan raised an eyebrow. "You know about computers?" "A little," Marcus said, but his eyes had lit up with interest, the first genuine enthusiasm Denise had seen from him all day. The laptop continued its electronic distress call. Jonathan sat down and opened it, revealing a blue screen covered with error messages. He cursed under his breath. "I've got 3 years of financial records on here," he muttered, pressing various keys with increasing frustration. "Files I need to review if we're going to figure out what happened to your building. Maybe you should call IT," Denise suggested, but even as she said it, she knew it was getting late. Most office workers had gone home hours ago. "They won't be available until tomorrow morning," Jonathan confirmed, his jaw tightening with frustration. "And by then, whoever's behind this will have had another night to cover their tracks." Marcus had drifted closer to the desk, drawn by the technical problem like a moth to flame. "What kind of error messages are you getting?" Jonathan looked at him skeptically but turned the screen around. "Some kind of registry corruption, I think. The system won't even boot up properly." Denise watched her son study the screen, his young face serious with concentration. She'd seen this look before, usually when he was hunched over the old desktop computer at the library, working on school projects with a focus that amazed her. "Marcus," she warned quietly, "don't bother Mr. Pierce with—" "Actually," Marcus interrupted, stepping closer to the desk, "I think I might be able to fix it." The silence that followed was deafening. Jamal looked up from the toy airplane he'd found on Jonathan's coffee table, while Keisha stirred sleepily in Denise's arms. Jonathan's expression was carefully neutral. "You think you can fix my laptop?" "Maybe," Marcus said, his confidence growing. "I've seen this error before. At the community center, they had old computers that crashed all the time. Mrs. Rodriguez taught me how to troubleshoot basic problems." Denise felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Marcus, honey, I'm sure Mr. Pierce has professionals who handle this kind of thing. You don't need to." "Let him try," Jonathan said quietly, and something in his voice made Denise look at him sharply. He was watching Marcus with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What have we got to lose?" Marcus approached the desk with the careful movements of someone trying not to appear too eager. "Can I?" Jonathan gestured to the chair. "Be my guest." What happened next left Denise speechless. Her 12-year-old son, who struggled with reading comprehension and had never shown particular interest in anything academic, transformed before her eyes. His fingers moved across the keyboard with surprising confidence, navigating through diagnostic screens and error logs like he'd been doing it for years. "The registry's corrupted, but the data's still intact," Marcus murmured, more to himself than to the adults watching him. "I just need to boot from safe mode and run a system restore." "How do you know all this?" Jonathan asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. Marcus glanced up, suddenly self-conscious. "I spend a lot of time at the library after school, while Mama's at work. The computers there are always breaking down, and the librarians can't afford to call repair people every time something goes wrong." Denise felt a stab of guilt. She'd known Marcus spent his afternoons at the library, but she'd assumed he was just doing homework or playing games. She'd had no idea he was teaching himself computer repair. "So you just figured it out on your own?" Jonathan pressed. "Mrs. Rodriguez helped at first," Marcus admitted, his attention split between the conversation and the screen. "But then I started watching YouTube videos, reading forums online. It's not that hard once you understand how the systems work." The laptop chimed, and suddenly the familiar Windows desktop appeared. Marcus had the grace not to look smug, but Denise could see the pride in his shoulders as he straightened up. "There you go," he said simply. "All your files should be intact." Jonathan stared at the screen, then at Marcus, then back at the screen. "That's impressive. It's just basic troubleshooting," Marcus said, but his cheeks had flushed with pleasure at the praise. Denise felt conflicted emotions warring in her chest. Pride in her son's unexpected talent mixed with worry about him showing off to someone who had the power to exploit that talent. She'd seen too many smart kids from their neighborhood get taken advantage of by people who promised opportunities but delivered disappointment. "Marcus, don't bother Mr. Pierce anymore," she said firmly. "You've done enough. Actually," Jonathan said slowly, "I'd like to see what other problems he can solve." "No," Denise said sharply, standing up so quickly that Keisha woke with a small cry. "I know how this works. Rich people find a smart kid from the projects, make a bunch of promises, then use them up and throw them away." The office fell silent except for Keisha's sleepy whimpering. Marcus looked between his mother and Jonathan, confusion evident on his face. "Mama, I was just helping. I know what you were doing, baby. And you did good. But we don't need Mr. Pierce thinking he's discovered some kind of genius he can exploit." Jonathan's expression had hardened. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think," Denise said, bouncing Keisha gently to soothe her, "that people like you are always looking for angles. Ways to make yourself feel good about helping the poor kids while getting something in return. And what exactly do you think I'd get from a 12-year-old's computer skills?" The question hung in the air, challenging her assumptions. Denise realized she didn't have a good answer, which only made her more defensive. Marcus stepped between them, his young voice cutting through the tension. "Maybe we could argue about this after we figure out who stole our home?" The simple logic of it, coming from the child they were arguing about, deflated some of the tension in the room. Jonathan actually smiled, and Denise felt her shoulders relax slightly. "Your son's right," Jonathan said. "And for the record, Mrs. Williams, I'm not interested in exploiting anyone. But I am interested in making sure talent like his doesn't get wasted because of circumstances beyond his control." He turned to Marcus, his expression serious. "That was good work. Real good work. Don't let anyone tell you it wasn't." As Marcus beamed under the praise, Denise felt something shift in her understanding of the man who'd upended their day. Maybe, just maybe, his interest in her son came from a place of recognition rather than exploitation. But she'd keep watching. Because when it came to her children's futures, trust would have to be earned one careful step at a time. The sharp click of heels on marble echoed through the office like gunshots. Jonathan looked up from his laptop, now functioning perfectly thanks to Marcus, and his expression immediately darkened. "She's early," he muttered, checking his watch. "Who's early?" Denise asked, but her question was answered as the office door swung open without ceremony. The woman who strode in was everything Denise expected from a high-powered attorney. Tall, blonde, and dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary, she radiated the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about where the next meal was coming from. "Jonathan," the woman said, her voice crisp with authority. "We need to talk." Her gaze swept over Denise and the children with barely concealed distaste, lingering on Keisha's worn clothes and Jamal's scuffed sneakers. "Ruth," Jonathan replied coolly, not bothering to stand. "I wasn't expecting you until tomorrow morning. Plans change." Ruth Blackwood, Denise recognized her now from the business magazines in the doctor's waiting room, set her briefcase on Jonathan's desk with a decisive snap. "Especially when I hear you've been making unauthorized promises to charity cases." The casual cruelty of the phrase hit Denise like a slap. Charity cases. As if she and her children were problems to be solved rather than people with lives that had been destroyed. Marcus stepped closer to his mother, his jaw set in that stubborn way that reminded her so much of his father. Jamal, sensing tension, abandoned his toy and moved to Denise's other side. "Careful, Ruth," Jonathan said, his voice carrying warning. "You're talking about my guests." Ruth's laugh was sharp and humorless. "Guests?" Jonathan, these people were evicted for non-payment of rent. They're squatters, not guests. Actually, Denise said, finding her voice despite the heat rising in her cheeks. We were current on our rent until someone mysteriously raised it by $600 with no explanation. Ruth's eyes narrowed as she studied Denise more carefully. You must be the Williams woman. I've been reviewing your file. My file? Denise felt a chill run down her spine. Why do you have a file on me? Because, Mrs. Williams, you've been flagged as a potential problem tenant. Late payments, complaints about building maintenance, association with undesirable elements. Ruth opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. The property management company has been very thorough in documenting your difficulties. That's not true, Marcus burst out. Mama's never been late on rent. She works 2 jobs to make sure we always pay on time. Ruth's smile was condescending. Young man, perhaps you don't understand how adult finances work. I understand lying, Marcus shot back, his 12-year-old voice cracking with indignation. And that's what you're doing. Marcus, Denise warned, but part of her was proud of her son for standing up to this woman. Jonathan had been watching the exchange with growing tension. Now he stood, his corporate authority radiating like heat. Ruth, what exactly are you doing here? Damage control, she replied smoothly, closing the folder. Word travels fast in legal circles, Jonathan. People are already talking about how Pierce Development's CEO is personally involving himself in eviction disputes. It's bad for business. Bad for whose business? Ruth's expression flickered, just for a moment, but Denise caught it. There was something calculating there, something that didn't match her explanation. Your business. Our business. The investors who trust Pierce Development to handle properties professionally, not emotionally. Ruth moved closer to Jonathan's desk, her voice taking on a persuasive tone. Jonathan, I understand you want to help. It's admirable. But getting personally involved with every sob story will destroy your credibility. Every sob story? Jonathan's voice had gone dangerously quiet. Per single mother's cute kids' tales of hardship, it's a tale as old as time, Jonathan. They know how to pull heartstrings. But business is business. Denise felt her temper flare. Lady, I don't know what kind of person you think I am, but I'm not here pulling anybody's heartstrings. I'm here because my children needed somewhere safe to sleep tonight. Ruth turned to her with a smile that never reached her eyes. Of course you are, dear. And I'm sure your situation is very difficult. But the solution isn't to burden Mr. Pierce with problems that should be handled through proper legal channels. What legal channels? Denise demanded. I tried calling the housing authority. I tried filing complaints. Nobody would listen. Perhaps because your complaints lacked merit, Ruth suggested smoothly. Jonathan slammed his hand on the desk, making everyone jump. That's enough. But Ruth wasn't finished. She opened her folder again, pulling out several documents. Jonathan, I've been reviewing the Maple Street property situation. The rent increases were completely legal, properly documented, and well within market standards. The evictions were processed correctly, following all city and state guidelines. She spread the papers across his desk like a dealer laying out cards. Mrs. Williams and several other tenants simply couldn't keep up with the market rate adjustments. It's unfortunate, but it's not the company's responsibility to subsidize housing for people who can't afford it. Denise stared at the documents, her heart sinking. They looked official, legitimate. Signatures and stamps and legal language that might as well have been written in a foreign language. This is impossible, she whispered. The rent was $800 for 3 years. It can't just jump to $1,400 overnight. Actually, it can, Ruth said, her voice taking on a lecturing tone. When previous leases were artificially low due to administrative oversights. The property management company was simply correcting the discrepancy to reflect fair market value. Marcus had been studying the papers over his mother's shoulder. Now he looked up at Jonathan, confusion evident on his young face. But you said someone was running a scam. You said families were being targeted. Ruth's laugh was sharp. Children have such vivid imaginations, don't they? Jonathan, surely you don't believe there's some conspiracy to push out tenants. This is simply market forces at work. But something in Ruth's eyes, a flicker of satisfaction, maybe even smugness, made Denise's instincts scream. This woman wasn't just defending the company. She was enjoying this. Jonathan must have seen it too, because his expression had gone stone cold. Ruth, he said quietly, I want you to walk me through every rent increase in that building for the past 6 months. Every eviction, every legal filing, every communication with tenants. Jonathan, that's completely unnecessary. I want to see every document. Every email. Every phone record. Ruth's composure cracked slightly. Are you questioning my competence? I'm questioning your motives. The silence that followed was electric with tension. Ruth's professional mask slipped just enough for Denise to see something cold and calculating underneath. Very well, Ruth said finally, gathering her papers. But I think you'll find everything was handled according to the letter of the law. As she headed for the door, she paused beside Denise's chair. Mrs. Williams, she said sweetly, I hope you understand that sometimes accepting reality is kinder than clinging to false hope. Housing assistance programs exist for people in your situation. Perhaps it's time to explore those options. After she left, the office felt like it had been hit by a tornado. Jonathan stood staring at the closed door, his hands clenched into fists. She's lying, he said finally. How can you tell? Denise asked, though every instinct she had agreed with him. Jonathan's smile was grim. Because I've seen Ruth Blackwood lie before. And because she just made one critical mistake. What's that? She assumed I wouldn't be willing to dig deep enough to prove it. The silence after Ruth's departure stretched like a taut wire. Denise sat rigidly in her chair, staring at the spot where the lawyer had stood, her mind churning with a toxic mixture of humiliation and rage. The woman's words echoed in her head: charity cases, sob stories, housing assistance programs for people in your situation. People in your situation. As if poverty were a character flaw rather than a circumstance. Mama? Keisha stirred in her arms, sensing the tension even through her sleepy haze. Are we in trouble? No, baby, Denise murmured automatically, though her voice sounded hollow even to her own ears. We're not in trouble. But they were. They were in the worst kind of trouble, the kind where powerful people with expensive suits and legal documents got to decide your fate, while talking about you like you weren't even in the room. Jonathan was still standing by the window, his shoulders rigid with anger. Denise, I want you to know that woman doesn't speak for me or my company. Doesn't she? The words came out sharper than Denise intended, but she was beyond caring about politeness. Because it seems to me like she speaks for your company just fine. She has all the documents, all the legal justifications. Hell, she probably has the key to our apartment too. That's not... What? Fair? Denise stood up, gently transferring Keisha to Marcus's arms. 8 hours ago, she'd been a woman with a job and a home and a plan for her children's future. Now she was someone's charity case, someone's sob story. Let me tell you what's not fair, Mr. Pierce. The words poured out of her like water through a broken dam. What's not fair is working 16-hour days and still not being able to afford the rent. What's not fair is watching your babies eat cereal for dinner because that's all you can afford until payday. What's not fair is having people like your lawyer look at you like you're some kind of parasite trying to get something for nothing. Jonathan turned from the window, his expression pained. Denise. Don't. She held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. Don't you Denise me like we're friends. We're not friends. Friends don't let their lawyers call other friends charity cases. I didn't know she was going to. Of course you didn't know. Because people like you don't have to know. You get to be the good guy while people like her do the dirty work. Denise felt tears threatening, but she pushed them back through sheer force of will. She would not cry in front of this man. Not again. Marcus shifted nervously, Keisha still asleep in his arms. Mama, maybe we should. Should what, Marcus? Should be grateful? Should say thank you for the scraps? Denise's voice was rising, and she could see Jamal shrinking back into himself the way he did when adults raised their voices. She forced herself to speak more quietly, but the anger still burned in every word. You want to know what I think, Mr. Pierce? I think you saw us on that street and felt guilty. Rich boy made good, coming back to save the poor people in his old neighborhood. Makes for a nice story, doesn't it? Jonathan's jaw tightened. That's not what this is about. Isn't it? Because your lawyer seems to think we're just another problem to be managed. Another file to be processed. Denise picked up her purse, checking to make sure their important documents were still inside. Birth certificates, social security cards, the few precious papers that proved they existed. Where are you going? Jonathan asked, concern creeping into his voice. I don't know. But I'm not staying here to be anyone's charity case. She looked around the luxurious office, taking in the expensive artwork and the view of the city that stretched beyond the windows. You know what the difference is between you and me, Mr. Pierce? What? When you were poor, it was temporary. You had somewhere to go, something to become. When people like me are poor, we're just poor. There's no escape plan, no business school, no investors waiting to fund our dreams. She shouldered her purse, the weight of it familiar and comforting. Everything she owned that truly mattered fit in one bag. That's not true, Jonathan said quietly. You're stronger than you think. Smarter than you know. Don't. The word came out as a whisper, but it carried the weight of every disappointment, every broken promise, every time someone had told her things would get better if she just worked a little harder, tried a little more. Don't tell me about my own strength. I've been strong. I've been strong for 12 years, ever since Marcus's father walked out. I've been strong through evictions and utility shutoffs and nights when I went to bed hungry so my babies could eat. She looked at her children, Marcus trying to look brave while holding his sleeping sister, Jamal clutching the toy airplane he'd found, both of them watching her with eyes that had seen too much for their ages. I'm tired of being strong, Mr. Pierce. I'm tired of fighting and scraping and begging for basic human dignity. And I'm especially tired of rich people telling me how grateful I should be for their help. Jonathan stepped toward her, his hand outstretched. Denise, please. Let me help you. Why? The question hung between them like a challenge. And don't give me some story about your childhood or your mother or how you understand what it's like. Tell me the truth. Why do you care what happens to us? For a long moment, Jonathan was silent. When he spoke, his voice was raw with something that might have been pain. Because Ruth is right about one thing. This is bad for business. Not because it makes me look soft, but because it makes me complicit. He sat heavily in his chair, suddenly looking older than his years. Do you know what it's like to spend 20 years building something you're proud of, only to discover it's been used to destroy the very communities you thought you were protecting? So this is about your guilt. Maybe it started that way. But it's not about that anymore. Jonathan looked directly at her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her pause. It's about the fact that your son fixed my computer in 10 minutes, and he's probably never had access to technology that could actually challenge him. It's about the fact that your daughter sleeps through chaos because she's learned that the world isn't safe enough to stay awake for. It's about the fact that you've been fighting a rigged game for so long you've forgotten that someone might actually want to change the rules. Denise felt something crack inside her chest. Not break, crack. Like ice beginning to thaw. People like you don't change rules for people like me, she said, but the fire had gone out of her voice. People like me are the only ones who can, Jonathan replied. The question is whether you're willing to let me try. The office fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Denise looked at her children, then at the man who'd turned their world upside down in the space of a few hours. If I say yes, she said finally, if I let you help us, this isn't charity. This is justice. You understand the difference? I do. And if your lawyer or anyone else calls us charity cases again, they'll be looking for new jobs. Denise nodded slowly, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Then I guess we're going to find out just how deep this goes. 3 hours later, Jonathan's office looked like a war room. Documents covered every surface: lease agreements, financial records, correspondence files, all spread out in organized chaos across his conference table. Marcus sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by manila folders, methodically sorting papers by date, while Keisha and Jamal slept on the leather couch nearby. "This doesn't make sense," Denise said for the third time, holding up 2 different lease agreements with her name on them. "According to this one, my rent was supposed to stay at $800 through next March. But this one says it jumped to $1,400 in September." Jonathan looked up from his laptop, where he'd been cross-referencing bank deposits from the property management company. "Which one has the official seal?" "Both of them." Denise held the documents side by side. "But the signatures look different. And the dates." She squinted at the fine print. "The expensive one is dated 3 days after I supposedly signed it." Marcus glanced up from his pile of papers. "Mama, look at this." He held up a folder thick with similar documents. "Mrs. Rodriguez from 4A, the Johnsons from 1B, old Mr. Peterson, they all have the same thing. 2 different lease agreements with different amounts." Jonathan stopped typing. "How many families?" 15 so far," Marcus replied, his young face serious with concentration. "All single mothers or elderly people. All with rent increases between $400 and $600. All people who couldn't afford lawyers to fight it," Denise added grimly. Jonathan's phone buzzed with an incoming call. He glanced at the screen and his expression darkened. "It's Ruth." "Don't answer it," Denise said quickly. "Actually, I think I should." Jonathan hit the speaker button. "Ruth." "Jonathan, I've been thinking about our conversation earlier." Ruth's voice was smooth, professional. "I may have been too harsh with your guests. Perhaps we could arrange some temporary housing assistance." "That's generous of you," Jonathan interrupted, his tone carefully neutral. "Tell me, Ruth, how long have you been overseeing the Maple Street property?" There was a pause. "About 2 years." "Why?" "And the rent adjustments that have been happening, those were your recommendations?" Another pause, longer this time. "Market adjustments are standard practice, Jonathan. You know that." Denise watched Jonathan's face as he spoke, seeing the corporate executive emerge. This was how he built an empire, she realized, by asking the right questions and listening to what people didn't say. "Of course." "And the property management company, Hartwell Associates, they've been responsive to tenant concerns." "Very responsive. They handle all day-to-day operations according to our standards." Jonathan was typing while he talked, pulling up files on his screen. "That's interesting. Because I'm looking at their service reports, and it seems like maintenance requests have been ignored for months. Broken heating, water leaks, electrical problems, all documented but never addressed. I'm sure there's an explanation." "I'm sure there is." Jonathan's voice had gone cold. "Ruth, I need you to come in tomorrow morning. Bring all the Hartwell contracts, all the tenant files, and all the correspondence related to rent adjustments." "Jonathan, I don't think." 8 a.m. sharp. He ended the call without waiting for a response. Denise felt a chill run through the room. "She's going to run." "Probably," Jonathan agreed. "Which is why we need to move fast." He turned to Marcus. "How good are you with that computer?" Marcus looked uncertainly at his mother. "What do you need?" "I need someone to help me access the Hartwell Associates server. Legally," he added quickly, seeing Denise's expression. "I have administrative access as the property owner. But their filing system is complicated." "Jonathan," Denise said slowly, "are you asking my 12-year-old son to help you hack into a company's computer system?" "I'm asking your 12-year-old son to help me access information that legally belongs to me but has been deliberately obscured." Jonathan's expression was serious. "But you're right to be cautious. This could get complicated." Marcus had already moved to the laptop. "What am I looking for?" "Marcus," Denise warned. Mama, someone stole our home. They stole 15 families' homes. If I can help stop them. He looked up at her with eyes that seemed far too old. Isn't that worth doing? Before Denise could respond, Marcus had opened the Hartwell Associates portal. His fingers flew across the keyboard, navigating through password-protected directories with surprising ease. How are you getting past their security? Jonathan asked, impressed despite himself. I'm not breaking in, Marcus explained, his attention focused on the screen. I'm just following the breadcrumbs they left behind. Look, every time they create a fake document, they have to store the original somewhere for legal protection. It's like insurance. The screen filled with file directories, each one labeled with cryptic codes. Marcus opened several, revealing the same pattern they'd found in the physical documents: original leases with reasonable rents, and falsified versions with inflated amounts. There, Marcus said, pointing to a folder labeled archive_backup_secure. That's where they're keeping the real records. What they found inside made Denise's stomach turn. Hundreds of files, organized by property address, containing the real story of what had been happening. Email chains discussing aggressive rent optimization strategies. Spreadsheets calculating how much money could be made by forcing out long-term tenants. Lists of target demographics: single mothers, elderly residents, immigrants with limited English. My God! Jonathan whispered, reading over Marcus's shoulder. This isn't just fraud. It's systematic exploitation. Denise found herself staring at a document titled Phase 2 Implementation. It outlined plans to expand the scheme to 12 other properties owned by Pierce Development, with projected profits in the millions. They were going to do this to hundreds of families, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Look at this, Marcus said, opening another file. It was an email thread between Ruth and someone named David Hartwell, dated just 3 weeks ago. From r.blackwood@piercedev.com to d.hartwell@hartwellassociation.com. Subject: Maple Street Timeline. David, need to accelerate Phase 1 completion. Potential buyer interested in entire block for luxury development. Target 80% vacancy by end of October. Increase pressure on remaining holdouts. Remember, documentation must appear legal if questioned. R. The reply was equally damning. Ruth, understood. Martinez family, 2C, and Williams family, 3B, are proving stubborn. Recommend immediate eviction proceedings regardless of payment status. Can fabricate lease violations if necessary. D. The silence that followed was deafening. Even sleeping on the couch, Keisha seemed to sense the shift in the room, stirring restlessly. They were never behind on rent, Denise said finally, her voice hollow. None of us were. This whole thing was manufactured. Jonathan was staring at the screen with an expression of rage so pure, it was almost frightening. They used my company. They used my name. They destroyed families and communities and called it business. What do we do now? Marcus asked quietly. Jonathan stood up, his decision crystallizing. Now we make sure everyone knows exactly what Ruth Blackwood and David Hartwell have been doing in my name. Denise looked at the evidence scattered around them, then at her son who'd helped uncover it, then at the man who'd given them the tools to fight back. For the first time in months, she felt something she'd almost forgotten, the possibility of justice. How do we do that? Jonathan's smile was sharp as a blade. We give them exactly what they've been giving you. A surprise they'll never recover from. Over the next 3 days, Jonathan's office became their temporary headquarters. What surprised Denise most wasn't the luxury, the catered meals, the comfortable furniture, the view of the city that never seemed to lose its magic for Jamal, but how naturally Jonathan included her in every decision. The Housing Authority inspector wants to meet tomorrow at 10, he said, reviewing their schedule over coffee that probably cost more per cup than she used to spend on groceries. I think you should be there when he reviews the evidence. Denise looked up from the legal brief she'd been studying, slowly, carefully, looking up words she didn't recognize but refusing to ask for help. Why me? You're the one with the law degree. Because you're the one who lived it. Jonathan's response was matter-of-fact, but something in his tone made her study his face. These bureaucrats need to see that this isn't just about property values and profit margins. They need to understand what their paperwork actually means to real families. It was a small thing, but it felt revolutionary. In Denise's experience, people like Jonathan made decisions about people like her, not with them. Marcus was sprawled on the floor nearby, working on what he called digital forensics, tracking the money trail through bank records and property transfers. He'd taken to the work with an enthusiasm that both thrilled and worried Denise. "Mama," he said without looking up from his laptop, "Mr. Pierce is right. When I tried to tell the school counselor about our housing situation, she just handed me a form and said someone would get back to us. But when Mr. Pierce called yesterday, they set up a meeting for next week to discuss my academic trajectory." The phrase sounded foreign in her son's mouth, like he was trying on clothes that didn't quite fit yet. "Academic trajectory," Denise repeated. "Is that what we're calling it now?" Jonathan looked up from his own stack of papers. "Marcus has been accepted into the city's advanced computer science program. Full scholarship, including after-school tutoring and summer camps." "Without asking me first," Denise said, though her tone was more curious than angry. "I didn't accept it," Marcus said quickly. "I just wanted to see if I could get in. But Mama, they said I tested in the 98th percentile. They said I have exceptional aptitude for systems analysis." Denise felt that familiar tug of war between pride and fear. "And what did you tell them?" "That I needed to talk to my mother first." Marcus closed the laptop and looked at her directly. "But I want to do it, Mama. I want to learn everything I can." Before Denise could respond, Keisha stirred from her nap on the couch, rubbing her eyes and looking around the office with the disorientation of someone waking up in an unfamiliar place. "Where are we again?" she asked sleepily. "Mr. Pierce's office, baby," Denise said, lifting her daughter onto her lap. "Are we still homeless?" The question hit the room like a physical blow. Jonathan stopped writing mid-sentence, and Marcus looked up from his computer with pain in his young eyes. "No, baby," Denise said softly, smoothing Keisha's hair. "We're not homeless. But we don't have our old apartment anymore." "No, we don't. So where do we live now?" Denise felt tears threatening. It was such a simple question, but she didn't have a simple answer. They'd been staying in a hotel that Jonathan was paying for, but that felt temporary, precarious. Like everything else in their lives. "We live where we're safe," she said finally. "And right now, that's here with Mr. Pierce, helping him fix the problems that hurt our family." Jonathan had been listening to this exchange with an expression Denise couldn't quite read. Now he set down his papers and came over to where they were sitting. "Keisha," he said gently, kneeling down to her level. "Do you remember me telling you about how I used to live in your building when I was little?" Keisha nodded solemnly. "Well, when I was your age, my family moved around a lot too. Different apartments, different schools, different neighborhoods. And I used to ask my mama the same question you just asked yours." "What did she tell you?" Jonathan's smile was sad but genuine. "She told me that home isn't just a place you live. It's the people who love you and take care of you. Your mama, your brothers, they're your home. Everything else is just geography." "What's geography?" Keisha asked. "Places on a map," Marcus answered. "Like addresses and stuff." "Exactly," Jonathan said. "And places on a map can change. But family doesn't." Denise felt something shift in her chest, that crack in the eyes she'd felt before, widening just a little more. She'd been so focused on protecting her children from disappointment that she'd forgotten they might be strong enough to handle hope. "Mr. Pierce," Keisha said seriously, "are you part of our family now?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Denise felt heat rise in her cheeks, embarrassed by her daughter's directness. "Keisha, honey, that's not—" "It's okay," Jonathan said quietly. He was still kneeling, eye level with the little girl, but his words seemed to be directed at all of them. "I'd like to be. If that's okay with your mama." "What does that mean?" Denise asked, though her voice came out more defensive than she'd intended. Jonathan stood slowly, his expression serious. It means I'm not going anywhere when this legal case is over. It means when Marcus starts his computer program, I want to hear about what he's learning. It means when Jamal starts kindergarten next year, I want to know how his first day goes. It means when you find a new job, and you will, I want to celebrate with you. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. I know you don't trust easily, Denise. And you shouldn't. Trust has to be earned. But I need you to know that helping your family isn't something I'm doing to feel better about myself. It's something I'm doing because you've reminded me why I started this company in the first place. Which was? To prove that success doesn't have to come at someone else's expense. To build something that lifts people up instead of grinding them down. Jonathan's voice carried conviction that reminded her of preachers she'd heard, but without the performance. Your family didn't just show me what was broken in my company. You showed me what was still possible if I had the courage to fix it. Denise looked at her children, Marcus listening intently, Jamal playing quietly with toy cars on the coffee table, Keisha still curled in her lap. 3 days ago, they'd been statistics, problems to be managed. Now they were being seen as people worth investing in. I've been disappointed before, she said finally. We all have. People make promises they don't keep. I know, Jonathan said simply. All I can tell you is that I've never made a promise to someone's children that I didn't intend to keep. Denise studied his face, looking for the tells she'd learned to recognize over years of being let down by men who'd seemed sincere. But all she saw was a successful man who remembered being a scared kid, and who'd somehow managed to hold on to both versions of himself. Okay, she said quietly. But if you hurt them, if you hurt us, you'll never forgive me, and you'll make sure I regret it for the rest of my life. Jonathan finished. I wouldn't expect anything less. As if summoned by the moment, his phone buzzed with a text message. Jonathan glanced at the screen, and his expression immediately hardened. What is it? Denise asked. Ruth. She wants to meet tonight. Says she has a proposal that will resolve this situation to everyone's satisfaction. Denise felt her stomach clench. It's a trap. Probably. Jonathan agreed. But it might also be our chance to end this once and for all. Marcus looked up from his computer. Can I come? Absolutely not, Denise said immediately. But I'm the one who found the evidence. Which is exactly why you're staying here where it's safe. Denise interrupted. She turned to Jonathan. We do this together, or we don't do it at all. Jonathan's smile was fierce. I wouldn't have it any other way. The meeting was supposed to take place in neutral territory, a coffee shop downtown, public enough to be safe, private enough for serious conversation. But when Denise and Jonathan arrived at 9 p.m., they found Ruth waiting in the parking lot beside a black SUV with tinted windows. Change of venue, Ruth said without preamble, her usual polished demeanor replaced by something harder, more desperate. My office. We need complete privacy for this conversation. I don't think so, Denise said immediately, every instinct screaming danger. It wasn't a request. Ruth's voice carried a threat that made Jonathan step protectively closer to Denise. You've been very busy these past few days, Jonathan. Asking questions, accessing files that were supposed to remain confidential. You've created quite a problem for several very important people. The only problem I've created, Jonathan replied coldly, is for criminals who've been using my company to commit fraud. Ruth's laugh was brittle. Fraud? Jonathan, everything we did was perfectly legal. Perhaps not ethical by your bleeding heart standards, but completely within the letter of the law. Falsifying lease agreements is legal now? Correcting administrative errors is always legal. The fact that those corrections resulted in market rate adjustments is simply coincidental. Denise felt sick listening to Ruth twist reality with legal language. This was how people like her got away with destroying families. They made cruelty sound like business. What do you want, Ruth? Jonathan asked. I want you to walk away. Both of you. Tonight. Ruth opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick envelope. "Mrs. Williams, there's $50,000 in cash in this envelope. First month's rent on a nice apartment, money for your children's education, enough to start over somewhere far from here." Denise stared at the envelope like it was a snake. $50,000 was more money than she'd ever seen in one place. It was college tuition for Marcus, medical care for when the kids got sick, the security she dreamed about but never dared hope for. It was also blood money. "And in return?" she asked. "You sign a non-disclosure agreement. You forget everything you think you've learned about Hartwell Associates and Pierce Development. You disappear. And if we don't?" Ruth's smile was sharp as broken glass. "Then things get very complicated. Computer hacking is a serious crime, Mrs. Williams. Even when it's done by children who think they're helping their mothers." The threat hit Denise like a physical blow. "You leave my son out of this. Your son inserted himself when he illegally accessed confidential business records. 12 years old is certainly young for a federal cybercrime conviction, but prosecutors have been very aggressive about making examples lately." Jonathan stepped forward, his voice deadly quiet. "You're threatening a child." "I'm explaining consequences," Ruth corrected. "Actions have results, Jonathan. The boy's actions, your actions, even Mrs. Williams' actions in harboring stolen information, they all have legal implications." Back at Jonathan's office, Marcus was supposed to be sleeping on the couch with his siblings. Instead, he was hunched over the laptop, his young face illuminated by the screen's glow. Something Ruth had said during her phone call earlier was bothering him, and he'd spent the evening tracing digital breadcrumbs through financial records. What he found made his blood run cold. The scheme was worse than they'd thought. Ruth and David Hartwell weren't just targeting individual properties. They were systematically destroying entire neighborhoods, one building at a time. And they were about to implement their largest phase yet. Marcus's fingers flew across the keyboard, downloading files, copying financial records, building a complete picture of the conspiracy. But as he worked, he heard the soft chime of an email arriving in Ruth's account, an account he'd been monitoring since yesterday. The message was simple but chilling: delete everything. Full system purge in 30 minutes. No traces. Marcus felt panic rise in his throat. They were destroying evidence. Right now, while his mother and Jonathan were meeting with Ruth, someone was erasing the proof they needed to stop this. He grabbed his phone and called Jonathan's number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried his mother's phone, same result. They were probably already at the meeting, maybe already walking into Ruth's trap. For a moment, Marcus sat paralyzed by indecision. He was 12 years old, sitting in a corporate office in the middle of the night, watching criminals destroy evidence that could save dozens of families. What was he supposed to do? Then he remembered what his mother always told him: when someone's in trouble and you have the power to help, you help. That's what family does. Marcus cracked his knuckles and got to work. The Hartwell Associates server was trying to delete files faster than he could copy them, but Marcus had an advantage: he understood their system better than they did. While they were purging obvious files, he was accessing backup servers, temporary files, cached data that their automated deletion couldn't find. Every keystroke was a race against time. Every successfully downloaded file was another family that might keep their home. He created multiple copies of everything, storing them in different cloud accounts, emailing files to himself, Jonathan, even the housing authority inspector. If Ruth wanted to destroy evidence, she'd have to find it all, and Marcus was making sure that was impossible. As he worked, his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number: "Stop what you're doing or your family pays the price." Marcus stared at the message, his hands shaking slightly. But then he thought about Mrs. Rodriguez from 4A, who'd helped him with homework when his mother worked late shifts. He thought about old Mr. Peterson, who always saved the last piece of candy for kids in the building. He thought about all the families who'd been scattered like leaves in the wind by Ruth's greed. He kept typing. The laptop screen filled with confirmation messages as files uploaded to secure servers. Bank records, email correspondence, falsified documents, payment schedules, everything Ruth thought she was destroying was being preserved in triplicate. When his phone buzzed again, Marcus ignored it. When the office landline started ringing, he ignored that too. Nothing mattered except making sure the evidence survived. By the time footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, Marcus had successfully backed up over 2,000 files. The digital paper trail that could destroy Ruth Blackwood's operation was now scattered across a dozen different servers, impossible to erase completely. The office door burst open, revealing Ruth flanked by 2 security guards. Her composed mask had finally slipped, revealing something desperate and dangerous underneath. "Step away from the computer," she ordered. Marcus closed the laptop calmly and stood up. "Too late." "What do you mean, too late?" Marcus met her gaze with the steady confidence of someone who just saved his family and dozens of others. "I mean you're done. Everything you tried to delete? I copied it. Everything you tried to hide? I found it. And everyone you tried to hurt? They're going to get justice." Ruth's face went white. "You little—" "I wouldn't finish that sentence if I were you," came Jonathan's voice from the doorway. He and Denise appeared behind the security guards, both looking furious but unharmed. "Marcus," Denise said, relief flooding her voice. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine, Mama. But Ruth's not going to be." Marcus opened the laptop one more time, showing them the screen filled with upload confirmations. "Everything's backed up. Every file, every email, every piece of evidence. Even if she destroys this computer, the proof still exists." Jonathan's smile was proud and fierce. "That's my boy." Ruth stood frozen in the doorway, finally understanding that her carefully constructed scheme had been brought down by a 12-year-old with a laptop and an unshakable sense of right and wrong. "Game over," Marcus said simply. 6 months later, Denise Williams stood in the kitchen of apartment 3B, the same apartment she'd been evicted from on that cold October day. But everything had changed. The walls were freshly painted in warm yellow, Keisha's choice. The appliances were new, the plumbing worked perfectly, and the heat never failed. Through the window, she could see the building's new playground where Jamal was teaching other kids how to build paper airplanes. "Mama, the laptop's ready for my presentation," Marcus called from the living room. He was preparing for his final project in the Advanced Computer Science program, a presentation on digital ethics and the responsibility that came with technological skills. 2 minutes, Denise replied, adjusting her blazer in the mirror. It was her first day as the new tenant relations coordinator for Pierce Development, a position Jonathan had created specifically to ensure that what happened to the Maple Street families never happened again. The legal aftermath had been swift and devastating for Ruth and her co-conspirators. Federal charges for wire fraud, conspiracy, and computer crimes had resulted in prison sentences that would keep them away from vulnerable families for years. David Hartwell's property management company had been dissolved, its assets used to compensate the families they'd cheated. But the real victory wasn't in the courtroom, it was in the lives that had been rebuilt. Mrs. Rodriguez from 4A had been able to keep her apartment and start the small catering business she dreamed about for years. Old Mr. Peterson had his rent stabilized and received the medical care he'd been putting off. The Johnson family from 1B had moved into a larger unit in the same building when their 4th child was born. All 15 families had been made whole, their leases restored to the original terms, their belongings returned or replaced. "You ready for this?" Jonathan asked, appearing in the doorway. He'd kept his promise about being part of their family, showing up for Marcus's school events, taking Keisha to father-daughter dances when she asked, teaching Jamal to throw a perfect spiral in the building's courtyard. As ready as anyone can be for their first day changing the world. Denise replied with a smile that still felt new on her face. The job wasn't charity, she'd made that clear from the beginning. Jonathan needed someone who understood the communities Pierce Development served, someone who could spot the early warning signs of exploitation before they became crises. Her salary was competitive, her benefits comprehensive, and her authority real. More importantly, she was good at it. 3 months of training had revealed skills she didn't know she possessed: negotiation, analysis, leadership. Turns out, managing a household on impossible budgets while raising 3 children had prepared her for corporate problem-solving in ways no business school could teach. "Marcus, come on," she called. "We don't want to be late for your big day." Marcus emerged from his room carrying a laptop bag that had been a gift from Jonathan, not charity, but an investment in someone whose potential deserved the best tools available. The 12-year-old who'd fixed a broken computer had grown into a confident young man who spoke fluently about cybersecurity and digital justice. His presentation today would be delivered to a room full of tech executives, law enforcement officials, and community advocates. The boy who'd once been invisible was now being listened to by people who made decisions that affected thousands of lives. "I'm nervous," he admitted as they headed for the elevator. "Good," Denise said. "Means you care about doing it right." The community center where Marcus would present was buzzing with activity. Representatives from major tech companies had come to hear about the Maple Street case, hoping to learn how to prevent similar exploitation in their own operations. Keisha and Jamal found seats in the front row, both dressed in their best clothes and bursting with pride for their big brother. Keisha clutched the stuffed rabbit that had seen them through their darkest day, now clean and mended, like so many things in their lives. When Marcus took the stage, Denise felt her breath catch. This was the same boy who'd been afraid to speak up in school, who'd hidden his intelligence because drawing attention felt dangerous. Now he commanded the room with quiet confidence. 6 months ago, Marcus began, my family was homeless. Not because we couldn't pay our bills, but because someone decided we were less important than their profit margins. He clicked to his first slide, showing the before and after data from Maple Street. Technology can be used to hurt people or to help them. The same skills that were used to forge our lease agreements were used to expose the truth and save dozens of families. Denise watched the audience lean forward, captivated by her son's clear, strong voice. But the most important lesson I learned wasn't about computers. Marcus continued. It was about courage. Sometimes being brave doesn't mean not being scared. It means being scared and doing what's right anyway. He looked directly at his family, his eyes finding Denise's in the crowd. My mama taught me that when someone's in trouble and you have the power to help, you help. That's what family does. And when we use technology to protect families instead of exploit them, we're all stronger. The standing ovation that followed brought tears to Denise's eyes. But it was what happened afterward that truly mattered, the conversations, the business cards exchanged, the commitments made by executives who'd been moved by a young man's story. Later, as they walked home through their neighborhood, their real neighborhood, where they belonged, Jonathan fell into step beside them. So, he said to Marcus, Stanford's computer science department called this morning. Marcus stopped walking. What did they say? They're interested in discussing early admission options. Apparently, your presentation today made quite an impression. Denise felt her heart skip. Stanford. Her son, her brilliant boy who'd grown up thinking college was something that happened to other people's children, was being courted by one of the nation's top universities. That's still 4 years away, she said, though she was smiling through tears. Good thing, Jonathan replied. Gives us time to prepare. All of us. As they reached their building, their home, Denise looked up at the windows glowing with warm light, at the families coming and going with the easy confidence of people who knew they belong. Ruth Blackwood had been right about one thing: actions had consequences. But she'd been wrong about which actions would matter most. A single mother's refusal to give up on her children's dignity. A wealthy man's decision to remember where he came from. A 12-year-old's courage to stand up for what was right. These were the actions that had consequences. These were the choices that changed everything. Come on, Denise said, taking her children's hands. Let's go home. And for the first time in years, home was exactly where they belonged.